This is episode 22 of the Three Body Problem. It is Friday, November 22nd, the day of CyberWarCon. Thank you very much, Juanito. You skipped CyberWarCon for this podcast. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I mean, for now, right? I'm going to try to make it to the second half of the conference, but I am definitely missing out on some pretty amazing talks.
Let's get right into it. How are you,
let's go.
Costin?
I'm good. I'm a bit sad I missed the registration window for CyberWarCon. Like, I already always leave it to the last minute. So now, registration is closed, and I can only be envious on Juan.
This is not a TLP conference, right? This is an open conference. Everything is public, right?
Yeah. It's open. It's recorded. I mean, I think they've done some kind of TLP talks before, but we have an open virtual stream, so I don't think that you're gonna. Like, that's a trade-off, right? Like, it's great to have a virtual conference and everybody to be able to watch, but unless you're willing to do that shit where you like shut the stream off or something like that, like you're basically just saying like this is all public.
Shout out to CyberWarCon. These guys have built an amazing brand in a very short time for an important topic, important conference for our kind of CTI threat hunting world. Let's get right into it because the talks are going on right now. We're going to be commenting a little bit on the public reporting on at least two of the talks that I saw public reporting on. One is shout out to Andy Greenberg. He got a heads up on Stephen Adair, the Volexity guys, doing a talk on APT 28, which is Russian APT, using hacking into a neighbor's Wi-Fi and using that Wi-Fi connection to hit a target across the street. Sounds very like movie-like. In some respects, in some ways, like I've seen some previous experience of this stuff being done in penetration testing, red teaming exercises, so it's not really a big shock to me. But pretty interesting story, Costin. You read the Andy Greenberg story. Any surprises there at all?
I would say that it's always surprising that it takes this long for APTs to implement what, let's say, pen testers and red teamers have been doing for years. Like, I always wonder why is it they takes that long? We know, I mean,
and what have they been doing? Like, explain the hops.
Well, I guess, APT 28 is on one hand an interesting threat actor here. Like, we know they're associated with the Russian military intelligence, and we also have the other group that people call Sandworm, also known as Hades, also known by many other names, which were actually doing these kind of things in person, like physically. They got arrested in Netherlands for doing exactly this kind of hacking.
They had the car trunk full of like Wi-Fi equipment.
Yeah,
we saw photographs of this years ago.
WCW.
The Volkswagen Golf with the Wi-Fi hacking equipment and
receipts of their cabs from the office to the airport, like OPSEC fails abound.
Yeah. So we have previous documentation of the Russians doing it physically. Well, it also says that someone needed to be physically present in Washington D.C. to do this. I mean, the story here is that they knew that the target was across the street to get into this Wi-Fi to hit that target. So there must have been either some insider thing or they're physically on the ground there.
Correct. I think there would have to be an agent in DC going around and looking for Wi-Fis closer to their target, and maybe trying to understand which companies are associated with those Wi-Fis. Because I mean, always that's an issue. You can see like some random Wi-Fi network names, but you need to know which company is what. So if you're going after one of those companies to pawn their Wi-Fi, you need to know that. I guess, by the way, there's another attack which is possible here, like just to establish persistence, and we've seen that happen in the past with Russian APTs. They go after a Wi-Fi, they crack the password, which is typically not difficult. Maybe it's some kind of an easy keyword, or maybe they just somehow manage to get their hands on the password, and then they go after the router, the Wi-Fi router, and they establish persistence there. And once they establish persistence there, they can reuse the access, like the physical proximity of that device to go after nearby targets. So that's one of the things we have seen before.
Did you guys read it that way of like somebody needed to be there? Because to me, the innovation, the the innovation here is not just the like near neighbor attack, but I mean, to what extent can I look on Google Street View, notice what the building next, or like what the office next to the target is, and then target those people and try to use, like, I feel like this is the kind of attack that turns the kind of Wi-Fi hacking they seem to like to do, probably as an excuse to go on a vacation to the Netherlands, and instead make it so that you like you don't need to do any of that. You can just remotely target the office that is physically located next to your target and go from there. Like I don't know if maybe I missed that. I'm not reading sort of deeply enough, but to me, what made this interesting is well, all of it is interesting. I think it's actually like the first really novel attack technique I think we've seen reported in a long time. So like super cool work by Volexity, but also how much of it would actually need somebody on the ground versus, I look on Google Street View, there's a place that's clearly way less defended nearby. I target them and I go from there, right?
I think that's one possibility. Me personally, knowing how these guys work, I don't think it's totally out of the question that they had someone on the ground there,
Oh,
just
for
looking
sure.
around and
For
trying
sure.
to maybe even like trying to hack the network for a while from a car, maybe, yeah.
Right.
Let's say, yeah, not enough time. Like we need to establish some kind of persistence. How about this other network which is
Right.
nearby? So let's go after this other one. But
I
I
mean,
mean,
that
yeah,
would make
there's.
sense. It would make sense. It would make this attack, I think, a little less novel in my
Mm-hmm.
book
Mm-hmm.
than the other way around. But regardless, if you think about this from the perspective of defenders and researchers, like look at your "never will I find you" infection vector, right? Like Volexity, at this point, Volexity does like remote forensics, and they do amazing work, right? Like I think in many ways they're giving Mandiant a run for their money. And At the same time, the Wired story talks about like Steve Adair having to like go and stand in the office and be like, what the fuck is going on, right? Like, how is this happening? So there is definitely an element of like the chances that you're going to figure this shit out remotely, or even like staring at logs are pretty low.
There's the
Costin,
two
is it truly
two.
novel though? Because I wanted to ask, didn't we see documentation of this type of thing in the Ant catalog?
I mean, yeah, the ad catalog, which is kind of the Bible for some of the researchers that I know, and still nobody knows for sure where it came from. It does actually mention some interesting hardware, such as PCI Express cards that you can put in a computer, and then you can use them for exfiltration purposes. So I think, yeah, that's perhaps maybe one level above this with interdiction and supply chain attacks. But thinking about this specific story, there were two points which came into my mind. One was that I would never, let's say, connect the Wi-Fi network to your internal network. Never, because specifically because of things like that. Sure, like you can have a password protected Wi-Fi which just gives you internet access, and then you need to VPN inside the real network. But unfortunately, even with such a configuration, I've seen cases, like I was saying, and this is a reality. You have a Wi-Fi access point, maybe Cisco, Ubiquiti, or whatever, which nobody updates. So the moment like the APT 28 guys or the Sandworm Hades guys, they arrive there, they guess the password, and if the router is not somehow firewalled, there's already like tons and tons of exploits, even older ones that they can use to hack the Wi-Fi router, and from there jump into your internal network. Because if they're not like physically separated, they can just jump inside, and we've seen that happening in the past.
Why aren't there more reporting of this, and why aren't APTs using this more, Juan? Or is it
Those
happening
are
willy nilly and nobody knows?
those are two completely different things, right? There's not so much APT reporting of it because it's very hard to account for. Like it's hard to see the traces of this having happened, right? Like think about all of the APTs that we have found where, that one casual throwaway line, no idea what the infection vector is. We have yet to know what the initial infector is, right? Like there's a lot of that. And one answer for that, a lot of times it may very well be, like we just have no idea. It was a file, it was a thing, it was a drive-by exploit, it was a previous existing infection that loaded this. There's so many possible answers, but one of those many possible answers is someone walked by with a backpack that had a bunch of Wi-Fi equipment in it, sat in a bench near the office, and magical things happened. And that's one of the many things to account for there. So I say that we treat those two questions separately because there's a difference between what we are seeing and accounting for and what APTs are doing. Like we know for a fact that there's several teams that have been doing this kind of thing for a while. And if anybody had doubts, right, like thanks to Russian tradecraft, we have a literally documented case of, the OPCW case is fascinating in that we've discussed it before, right? Like it's probably the best case of being able to do a full spectrum report of what a threat actor's operations look like from the technical side, and to be able to tie it to the physical people sitting in a car, arrested, pictures of those people, pictures of their passports, etc. Which is a report I think nobody has written. I've always been kind of curious, right? Like between the Mueller report, the stuff that everybody had been reporting about APT-28 operations up to that point, and the reports about sort of the Bellingcat stuff about the OPCW arrests, like you have probably a once in a lifetime opportunity to write a comprehensive attributory report about that stage of APT-28's operations, right? Obviously things have changed a lot since then. But it just goes to show, like, this has been done. It's been done for a long time. And I'm sure this and way worse is happening from, like, physical intrusions. Like, we know with, original Stuxnet, lots of Lambert stuff. Like, there are threat actors who don't want to use remote infection vectors at all. I'm sure that there are some Western organizations for whom that is doctrine. Right? Like we're just not going to go. Well, there's a lot of doctrinarian stuff that comes in when it comes to tradecraft, particularly for human organizations. Something that we need to consider is that there are orgs for whom OPSEC is a priority, and there are orgs for whom OPSEC is a life and death thing. And the life and death orgs are willing to take on a whole different level of cyber tradecraft, because failure at that point is not a blog. Failure is, people die. So, and we've seen those failures, right? Like the rolling up of like Iran networks, CIA Iranian networks based on like these websites that were being used for comms, things in China, et cetera, where, you fuck something up in how you do your covert comms, and all of a sudden, the 12 people that were your great intelligence network inside of a country are all lined up against a wall and shot. So like there's different stakes for certain situations.
Costin, we're not supposed to stop using Wi-Fi now, right? Like what if your threat model is in APT-28, like what is the defense here?
I would like separate things one from the others, and even something that I have been doing and something that I like is just to have a completely separate Wi-Fi access point from your main internet, and the Wi-Fi access point itself VPNs into some public VPN somewhere else.
So fancy motherfucker with his Proxmox setup. Like
that's the first, absolutely.
Proxmox. Yeah.
And GLINet.
I gotta contact Proxmox about an advertising on this show.
Sponsorship for this show, the custom Proxmox hour.
Proxmox, pfSense, and GLINet. GLINet is the third thing I'm dropping here. But there's by the way, there's one more thing you can do, and one of the things that I've been doing with for some of my friends that, let's say, had some kind of uh, issues and problems, is to set up an IMSI sniffer. So you set up the IMSI sniffer, which is a bit difficult if you, let's say, have several networks that are popular in your place or in your country. But nevertheless, you can set up an IMSI sniffer for, let's say, one or two of them. And then whenever, let's say, something weird happens on the Wi-Fi, so just make sure you have logs, but at least you know that between this period of time, something was happening. And that was the case that I investigated some time ago. During that period, you have the IMSI logs, and you can actually see which country are the new IMSI numbers which are present during that period of time. So what happens, I tell you what happens in reality is that when people come nearby your office with these bags and laptops and stuff, they also have their mobile phones in their pockets. And maybe they're like from another country and they don't realize the fact that you have the IMSI sniffer, and you see that suddenly somebody from a certain country appeared nearby your office during the period when hacking was happening and the logs were being thrown left
You're
and
talking
right.
about multiple layers of paranoia, though. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
asking about the guy in Washington D.C., the building across the street in Washington D.C.
He's not that far off in the sense of like I actually don't know how an MC sniffer even goes on like as far as like FCC like regulations go,
It's
but
fully passive, like fully
it's
passive.
passive. But like
Yeah.
so, what I will say, this reminds me of a talk by our friend Ryan, different Ryan, that from Suits and Spooks 2015.
Pull the mic just a
Ryan
little bit closer.
Ryan and you and I were both there for this talk, and it was about physical security in these situations. And a similar technique that comes to mind to what Kostan's describing was sniffing for these Bluetooth devices, particularly. I want to say it was Bluetooth, right? But particularly, it was I forget what you call these, uh, the sensors for the tire pressure in the cars.
TPMS, yeah, the tire
Right.
pressure monitoring sensors, yeah.
So if you can monitor for those devices in a relatively decent range around your place, it actually makes surveillance quite hard and interesting, right? Because you can see what cars are usually in your block, what just drives by, and then what starts popping up and certain place. So like there's a way in which you start having this kind of recurring sense of it's situational awareness, right? Like I think whenever we start to talk about defending against top tier APTs, security has to be a holistic thing. If you want to say, oh no, but only in cyber, you go, well, then I can only give you this much assurance of your defense because cyber doesn't account for the fact that they can walk in and steal a computer. They can bring in somebody that wasn't supposed to be working there. They can sneak in at night and plug a USB. They can, if you want to say our job is only cyber, cool, but it means that you're neglecting an entire aspect of security that will mean that cyber security will fail.
Anything else at CyberWarCon that's worth paying attention to next week? I mean, they're probably going to release the talks then. Oh, by the way, I saw another reporting on another talk about data from the Chinese surveillance state being kind of pushed into black markets and available for sale now. That is not entirely a new
folks,
thing.
That's Aurora
correct.
Johnson and
What do we know
someone else.
about that story?
Well, I would have loved to watch the talk, but I'm here with you guys.
Rub it in. No, but the idea there is that, I mean, China has this massive surveillance state. All this data obviously has to sit somewhere, and the people inside there are selling it, or there's availability to purchase it. You have to imagine important three-letter agency people are already there. How do we, as threat researchers, benefit from this availability? Do you guys have a thought?
I mean, I fucking love it. First of all, in a sense, like it's great to hear. And honestly, what I will say is this is something that's already been known about the Russian ecosystem. that I know folks at Bellingcat and other places have been taking advantage for a long time, right? Like I have found it really hard to believe, but I remember during the pandemic, Eric Toller from Bellingcat actually taught us like a remote training about like OSINT when it comes to like Russian ops. And obviously phenomenal, right? These guys do amazing work. And one of the things that he was talking about was, there are Telegram bots that you can go pay in cryptocurrency to run queries in like Russian databases for you. There are even like supposedly the rumor goes that someone on the streets at a stop sign can very well be selling like burned DVDs or USB keys that have like the database for Russian transportation that got popped in 2023. So you have this like data black market, which is going to happen in any society with this level of technical acumen and also a need for finances. But the idea that this is coming from the surveillance apparatus in China is that much more interesting, right? Like you've built this amazing panopticon capability, and now it's also up for the highest bidder. So I love that for them. I love that for the Chinese. I think that just the same as if they want to monitor everybody, I'm sure we can lend them a hand. And I wonder what the prices are like, and what it takes to grab some of this data.
No, some of those prices were pretty high, like $10,000 for a query or something like that. So I guess the risk is also pretty high. And now that the story is public, I would assume that they'll be investigating and arresting pretty much anyone who is caught doing things like that.
Not to mention, I mean, to what extent, like when you talk, the problem with talking about queries as opposed to talking about bulk feeds is you'll never be able to run any meaningful op because you have to hand your selectors over to an unknown entity, and they would be dumb not to start like the Iranian style, right? Like start running some of those yourself and wait to see who asks for what and who's willing to pay. So no serious player is ever going to run a query by a third party. You go, hey, yeah, I'll pay you 15,000, but give me the whole fucking database and let's go, right?
A lot of that is happening. I mean, you have to imagine, right?
For sure.
Speaking of Chinese and surveillance, can we get to the Typhoon portion of our podcast? Because this topic bores me.
Have you gotten like a promotional video or something made yet where we can just run it in the podcast, like FOMO Typhoon, and it's just like a bunch of...
There's gotta be.
It's like a cartoony transition.
The truth is, this story bores me without new details or any sort of technical details, so we know what's going on. It's just like a bunch of drip leaks. And we've discussed that nauseum on this podcast. But we now get new word, and I bring this story up because we have the new NSA director, what's his name? General Timothy Haw, 4-star Air Force general. He's basically saying the private sector needs to take swift collective action to share key details about the breaches suffered at the hands of these Typhoon people who have infiltrated U.S. telecommunications companies.
This is so...
In calling for more disclosure, he didn't identify specific companies, but he wants to provide a quote-unquote hunt guide so cybersecurity professionals and companies can search out the hackers and eradicate them from telecommunications networks. Is he being misquoted? Like, what on earth did I just read?
Please God, give us some data. Is a nice summary. So okay, no shade on Tim Hawk. I actually like General Hawk, but this is actually a shameful, shitty story. It's actually horrible to read in a lot of ways, right? Like NSA out here basically being like, please God, give us some data is kind of like the cherry on the sad bingo.
We don't believe that, though. None of us believes that they need that data from the private sector.
Oh no, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. Well, so let me paint a completely different picture for you, and this ties into a lot of things that we've discussed on this podcast, right? The NSA, as it is written and the way that it's built and the way that it's, whatever legal framework is involved in this shit, doesn't have those superpowers inside of the US. It does not have insane capabilities for collection within the US, within US networks, and presumably is not sitting inside of like US telcos and so on. So I don't read this as let's add to that our discussion about the typhoons and what I said about China engineering into our blind spots. Ryan, like you've really pushed back on me being like almost feral in my willingness to like unlock USIC capabilities on what are quote unquote US orgs, which I fucking hate that distinction because I think you're applying a concept of physical locality to internet organizations where like that physical locality doesn't mean shit. It means jack shit, right? Like if Kostin were hacking on behalf of Romania, and he goes and he buys a VPS on Amazon, that is not U.S. infrastructure. It is a U.S. company enabling a Romanian operation unwittingly. So the idea that like you can't touch that, it just doesn't. It's an antiquated idea that does not fit the modern context. So you put those two things together, and I don't think this story is Tim Hawk asking industry for data. I think he's asking Cisco, AT&T, Verizon, the telcos to find some way to share what they're seeing about the typhoons. And it, like I said, it's like sad story bingo to see the NSA walking around going, God, someone please share some data with us. But at the same time, like this is a situation of our own making. How long have I like been bitching and have all of us been bitching about like, well, how are we going to handle legal liability protections? How are we going to get the lawyers out of the room? Like who gets to show up with a piece of paper that says, we are in an emergency. You will not get sued for any of this. Now tell your lawyers to get the fuck out of the room and leave the analysts here and tell us what the hell is going on. That doesn't exist in the US, as far as I know. And this is a situation, like this is where you get to the super sad state of affairs, which is what I understand about Salt Typhoon is that the Chinese have built a passive surveillance capability within the United States and have been operating it for years. And we have been faffing around, joking about APT 10 and APT this and that, and look at the Chinese doing X and Y and Z and intellectual property, blah, blah, blah. And in the meantime, they have an amazing surveillance capability within the, continental United States. And we have been A, completely unaware, B, completely unable to stop it. I mean, it's a counterintelligence failure of catastrophic proportions. And so in that sense, I'm not tired of the story. I'm terrified, annoyed, bored, pissed off, and feeling a little bit hopeless.
When can we get some IOCs from somebody?
Well, that's what Tim's asking, bro. General Hawk would like to know when we can get some IOCs from somebody, if someone's willing to share. Look, if you read carefully into what's happening with this FOMO Typhoon shit, I don't even know what's useful as IOCs. Right? Like you're telling me that something comes out of an orb network. It hits, like the orb network's going to reconfigure. You're going to have 10 billion out, like ways to come out. It hits a Cisco appliance. It uses the tools from within the Cisco appliance for PCAP sniffing and whatnot. And then they delete the logs, they delete what's in there, and they walk away. What fucking IOC am I supposed to be sharing with you, right? Like, if anything, I think that most of the onus here falls on Cisco. Like, Cisco, is this another one of these, yeah, we'll help you if you sign an NDA situations? Is this another one of these, well, I'm sorry, but our proprietary iOS kernel is not up for, you to investigate it. We'll investigate and we'll let you know what we see. Because that's what it
these
sounds
things you're
like to
describing
me.
is the status quo around a lot of the IR into like the Fortinets and these edge
Yeah.
devices that we've been talking about at length. This is the problem that threat researchers face, is that they run into these kind of roadblocks from these vendors, not only Cisco, from all these vendors, basically saying sign an NDA or this is out of scope. You can't look at this. This is normal.
Sign an NDA or you're on your fucking own. Like, we are not giving you our tools for inspecting these things. We're not going to tell you how to do it. We're not going to do it for you. And you're
Where is
unable to do it
CISA and
yourself.
and all these people signed the pledge? The pledge has a transparency component to it. I know I sound like a broken record, but like, why are we allowing these vendors to do this, having signed a pledge promising transparency? And then, I don't want to go off on a rant here, but I see Microsoft had this Microsoft Ignite conference where they're showcasing all their new security, AI, blah, blah, blah. And literally, CIS is on stage with them, patting them on the back for being amazing about secure by design. And I'm like these things, there should be oil and water. Now we're
These,
talking about. Sorry.
dude, people need jobs after CISA gets sort of phased out. No, look, it's a super sad state of affairs. I had wanted to look on Cisco so much better, and I'm realizing that I've been almost naive in my willingness to look at Cisco that way. I'm a little concerned, sort of looking at the moves within Cisco recently. Like, what made Cisco cool and great was Talos. You have this team of amazing researchers. They've discovered cool shit. They have all this great telemetry in theory. And so they're like meaningful contributors into the space. Now we're seeing them start to cut back, right? They're starting to fire people around Talos. They're starting to telegraph things that suggest to me that maybe somebody within Cisco has suddenly decided that maybe security is not the best use of their time. And at that point, you add that to this whole NDA provision for IR, and Cisco is starting to look a whole lot like Ivanti, Pulse Secure, Fortinet, whatever the fuck else. Like,
Palo
my
Alto as well. I
sympathy
mean,
is zero.
we have friends in the threat research kind of IR components at Palo Alto. I mean, every one of these big vendors, you see them we know they have security expertise in there. We know they have amazing talent in there, but they still make these hiccups after hiccups. We start to see these 0 days, no CVEs, no patch, IOCs are limited. Like, this is par for the course from these big vendors. And I feel like we kind of
But
just accept
there's
it
no
as
change. Like, look at what is supposed to be driving realistic change right now. Like, we're asking people to be nice and to have values and to be idealistic and to do what's right. And that shit does not play out in capitalism. But what does play out is legal requirements, regulations, financial incentives. So to me, like, I am not going to bitch about the pledge for the 17th time in 22 episodes. What I'm gonna say is the regulatory side of this has fucking failed us,
Yeah.
and it's only about to get worse. So that's why I'm turning my focus almost exclusively to the free market side of it, which is, once again, give us inspectability. If one vendor shows up with inspectable enterprise grade shit, then this podcast can become the go buy this appliance podcast and stop fucking with these other people, because all of a sudden it becomes a competitive advantage, right?
Costin, Juan described, just getting back quickly to close the loop on this Typhoon thing. Juan described how very, very difficult it is to even have IOCs, or what kind of IOCs are we going to get, which suggests to me that it's also probably very, very difficult to root these people out of these networks. And I saw Senator Warner with some pretty, hair on fire quotes saying these people are still in there and millions of Americans are potentially being spied on, and it's very, very difficult to disinfect. And we know based on the reporting, they've been in there for many, many years. Like, how is this ever going to get cleaned up, or do we always assume that element of risk that these guys are always going to be sitting in there somewhere?
I
And
absolutely.
what kind of IOCs do you want to see? Let me just ask.
Well, let's do it like this. So I think there's three things that the U.S. could probably do to make the situation better. Three things. One, the head of the NSA is asking the industry to share IOCs. I am a very strong supporter of the idea of leading by example. So first, I would just recommend the NSA, takes the lead and shares everything they know about Salt Typhoon. That's number one. You want the people to share with you, you share first. So how
You're
about leading
assuming
by
they're not
example?
sharing.
Publicly,
Let the man ask for what he wants first. I'll come to you and ask.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
We know you have the IOX. I'm talking about the others, the rest of us.
I'm just saying. I'm not saying they're sharing everything. I still agree with your point. I'm just saying like they're sharing and sharing, right? You're still right. Forgive me. Keep going.
First, share publicly. Do the good thing here, lead by example, publicly share what you have, and then you'll see that others start to publicly share their own. Like we've seen this so many things. We saw a report by our colleagues at whatever company, and we looked at our data and we found more. And then, it's the stone soup. So the second thing I would do, I would organize a closed door conference and invite all the big security companies, each one to present on Salt Typhoon. So like everybody comes, we were doing things like that in the past at the whoever, big company headquarters, and everyone shares what they have too. And I would say that once you have these 2 points, like NSA is sharing to do the conference, then I would say that you should also not exclude the idea that Salt Typhoon is not just in the US, but it's probably in many, many other places around the world. Like why they should be only in there, right? At the same time, it feels that, at least is my feeling. So one of the stories was saying, yeah, they were spying on Trump and they were spying on J.D. Vance. So the future president, vice president of the United States, they were spying on the other campaign, and nothing happens. So the third thing I would do, I would appoint a commission with the sole purpose of investigating how this was possible and write like a comprehensive 300 pages report minimum of how this happened with all the IOCs, who's responsible, and what will be done in the future, and make it public.
Why minimum 300 pages? Like the length determines
Yeah, because 290 pages will be the legal language and 10 pages of really useful information like screenshots and maybe some TTPs and IOCs. So once
He's on his comedy bit.
Like this is my plan, 1, 2, 3. So let's see how many we talk again in 2-3 months and see how many of these actually happen.
Juan, give the people an idea, just generally, about what's going on behind the scenes in this sharing world, because obviously there are victims everywhere. There's a lot of big organizations everywhere. There's a lot of legal. There's a lot of law enforcement. There's a lot of politics. Like this story is just not, hey, just toss out some samples and IOCs there. There's a lot of competing interests. What can you tell the people about what's actually going on behind the scenes?
Not as much as you would like to be happening in this particular case. I think that's sort of part of the problem. And I have several points of like near obsessive complaining, and one of them is liability and legal. The reason that I keep doing that is that it's deeply consequential. It seems inconsequential in the broad moments that are not that important, right? Like when you go, I went to give this talk and there were these 2 really cool details, but I couldn't share them because my lawyers would not let me. And you go, oh, it's like a small thing. And you see me kind of like grit my teeth a little bit because I don't think it's a small thing, because it doesn't matter in that situation quite so much. But when it matters, it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. And what we're seeing here is the levels of perceived liability are stratospheric in this Salt Typhoon situation, particularly when you tell me that like there was foreign spying on like the president-elect and like different people like this. I bet you there are lawyers at like there's about a 20-to-1 ratio of lawyers to researchers engaged in this in companies like AT&T and other places, Verizon, whatnot. And the last thing those people give a shit about is information sharing right now. They're trying to keep themselves out of like congressional testimonies, right? Like they're trying to keep themselves away from the commission that Kostin is describing, be there a 300-page report or not. And under those circumstances, the idea that the onus is on researchers to take their jobs in their hands and go play whistleblower just to be able to share some intel with whomever is insane. It's anathema. It's entirely ridiculous. And what I would propose to General Hoff and other people is, if this is so important, how about you show up with some kind of provision wherein, fuck it, compel them, right? Like, to what extent can you come in with some national security, whatever, and say, we need you to A, shut your mouth, B, give us everything you have on this? There is some legal, there has to be some vehicle by which you could do that. And half the time, because of, again, the perception of liability, right? Programs like Prism and other situations where um, the in the post Snowden era, people got to cry about collaborating with the U.S. government. All it really became was oh, bro, I'll give you that data, but please send me one of those letters that say that I have to, so that if anybody comes bitching about how we collaborate with you, I can just be like, oh, no, they made me, guys. Like, I would never, but this awful, oppressive government made me share this data with you. I think that the problem with that having become the sole vehicle of it is that you don't have a proactive sharing mechanism. You don't have a willing sharing mechanism, and you don't have a comprehensive collaborative sharing mechanism, because what you're saying is, compel me to give you X. It means you already know what X is. It means that you already, like, you know what you are asking for. It's not compel me to collaborate with you. That's not a vehicle that exists. I can't like, it's almost like Fourth Amendment problematic for me to like be like, yo, Ryan, I need you to go search through your whole house and find anything that broadly fits a description of what I'm kind of looking for, and then give it to me. Like, you can't do that. And this is where we're starting to see a terrifying reality of just how bad and sparse and antiquated our national security mechanisms are. Like, we are getting fucked.
Juanito was just mentioning that he hopes the free market kind of helps deliver the answer to everything. And I want to pivot to a great bit of reporting in ProPublica. This story about Microsoft offering the White House free cybersecurity tooling, free cybersecurity expertise, free upgrades, consultants to go into the U.S. government and install these things. And then, of course, turned on E5 licensing later on. The bill became due. Nobody, just kind of got this massive Microsoft lock-in at the U.S. government. Pretty fascinating reporting with some on-the-record quotes and some, internal Microsoft information on the negotiations and the contracting here. This story really, really disappoints me. I mean, is this how bad our government is, Juan? That we just kind of, that these big corporates just walk in and just trick us into doing all this madness?
You remember how much we were like bitching and yelling at the time about like this is like post Solar Winds,
Yes.
post Hafnium stuff, where you what was it, right? Like, again, CISA came out to wash Microsoft's hands and say, oh, look, guys, they're gonna give us the logs. It's like, they're gonna give us the
Free
logs
logs
they
for
said,
everyone. Yeah.
free logs. And it's like, yeah, they're gonna give us the logs they said they were gonna give us before, and they didn't give us, and now they're gonna give them to us, and it's definitely not a business proposition, right? Like, it's, yeah, I mean, is our government as bad as it sounds? It sounds pretty fucking bad. It sounds pretty fucking dumb. And frankly, it sounds like they're getting played left and right. And what I can say is, as outsiders that had no real notion of what was going on, it certainly looked that way from the outside. So, the idea that you're like surprised and caught with your pants down is insane. Like, we live in a world where um, contracting to gov, selling to gov, is completely an all carrot and no stick situation. And that's what you're gonna get when you literally get fucked by your vendor, right? Like, APT 29 or whomever walks into Microsoft and screws NSA and everybody else from within Microsoft. And the response is, God damn it, how much do I need to pay you for you to like fix this for me? And it's insane. Of course, this like the incentives are so misaligned because it's like a spoiled child. You know, you're misbehaving in school. Here's more allowance money for you to stop doing that. It's like, bro, that anyone can tell you. I have no kids. I can tell you that's not going to work, right? Like,
Now
anyway.
you see why. Now you see why the CISA and the U.S. government appearing on stage, patting Microsoft on the back, really
Yeah,
bothers me.
dude. I
Right? I
mean,
mean,
like,
why isn't
wait,
this a
wait.
bigger story? Why isn't this a bigger story? I mean, we're talking about violation of federal procurement, antitrust laws, lock-in, vendor lock-in, freezing out competitors. Like, why isn't this the biggest story and all in trade press? And it's just a ProPublica thing that kind of came and went, to be honest.
It's too complicated for Republicans in power to understand it, so they're just not touching it, I guess. No, the I have no idea why it's not a bigger story. I think in part we are now in that bizarre gentleman's agreement freeze that comes with like lame duck uh, sessions of everything, and I guess we're distracted and busy with the chaos that is ensuing right now, as you would expect. But yeah, no, I think it's pretty fucked up. I think it was fucked up before. I think we complained about it at the time, and nobody really listened to us. It was kind of like you're picking on CISA. It's like, no, we're not picking on CISA. Like some insane shit just went down with Microsoft. This is the second time that we're dealing with this, that they promised something they haven't given us. And within like 24 hours, CISA was out there going, "Oh, how great is Microsoft? Look at how good they're doing." You're like, bro, at least give them a second to feel the pain. Like anything. Let them give you the logs before you pat them on the back. Like, what is this idea of like praise before like getting any kind of concession? And that's the same problem with the fucking purity pledge. The problem with the pledge is not that it exists. It's not that you're giving people accolades or recognition. Like the problem is that in true CISA fashion, you give people the reward before they do the thing you're asking for. And then you go, well, surely they're going to do it. We'll come back to you in 2 years. Like, that's fucking crazy.
Speaking of lame duck and transition, we have an active story now. The Department of Justice, US DOJ, calling for the breakup of Google and the sale of Chrome, which has its own security implications. This kind of ties into this Microsoft Chrome lock-in. We've seen Microsoft accusing Google of astroturfing. They had this really fascinating
Oh,
blog post with like just whining and whining about all these
so
things Google are doing to
sad.
them. We had the CSRB report, and Microsoft constantly reminds me privately that, Google has a VP that sits on the CSRB report. Like, what do you expect? We've seen wording out of Google saying Microsoft is a monoculture. This post CSRB, they used the monoculture word. So, like, there's some big happenings there. DOJ calling for a breakup of Google and a sale of Chrome. This is a case that started in the previous Trump administration, that the Biden administration decided to continue and take up. And now we're at this stage now where there's a new administration coming in. Where do you see this playing out? Do you think this, and nobody can guess about what the new administration will do, but how do you see this playing out? And is there, like, what's the security implications of Google being forced to sell Chrome? Like, who are they going to sell it to? Who can afford Chrome? And don't we have the same problem with the new buyer? Like, I don't understand this story at all.
Are you asking me?
Anybody take a stab at helping me figure this out?
Let Kostin do it. Kostin, come on,
Man,
man.
like I'm the expert in US
US
internal
business law.
politics and the Department of Justice. But I would just say that, like, on one hand, it's the current Department of Justice that is doing this. So for some reason, they're doing it ahead of time and before, I don't know, the new government takes over. The other thing here, maybe, it's possible just to spin Google as a completely separate, independent company without having to sell it to, I don't know, Samsung or TikTok or Pepsi or Coca-Cola or whatever, right? So maybe they can just be a separate company by itself, which maybe it's not entirely bad. Maybe, again, hear me out. The fact that Chrome, let's say, is or would be more disconnected from Google and so on, maybe it actually helps from a privacy point of view. We've seen recently how Google has been modifying Chrome to make it difficult for people who create blocking extensions, for instance, to block access to advertisers and to essentially protect you, shield you from advertisers. So whenever, let's say, Chrome is separate from Google, like this is no longer, I guess, on the table. And we've seen, for instance, Apple doing a lot of things in this regard because they simply don't care. They don't care if they break Google search, or they don't care if they break Google AdWords. It's like absolutely no business connection. So from this point of view, maybe it's not entirely a bad thing.
The
Maybe.
new buyer will do the same thing. It's not a browser. It's a search bar to search marketing
No,
dollars.
it's a vertical integration problem. So the issue here is, and this is like a classic like monopolistic issue. It's if I own the if I go vertically integrate my business, then I no longer have a competitive motivation to keep the playing field even for the other people who depend on a similar substrate, right? Like the reason it's actually smart of them to focus on Chrome, because the way that I read this problem is Google has been rigging the game in ads on their own behalf for many, many years, making insane amounts of money, and we only find out about it later. And now you're in this bizarre situation where you go, well, make how do we introduce fair practice into an advertising ecosystem where the ads are served by like the person owns the medium for the delivery of the ads, which is the same person that owns the auctioning of the ads, which is the same person that owns the targeting of the ads, and then also even owns the vehicle by which the ads are displayed to customers, and is being so brazen in their disregard for the customer or consumer, really consumer, because it's not a customer. We don't pay for Chrome. That's part of the problem. That they're literally willing to block the ability of the consumer to decide if they even want to see any of that content or not. So, like, in a way, there's some cleverness to saying, hey, maybe you guys don't need to own the fucking like the billboard itself. Like maybe you don't need to own the thing that's showing you the final ad because you're being poor stewards of it, right? Like I appreciate that Apple goes, yeah, I don't give a shit if I'm gonna break your ad stuff. Like my customer is the person that buys the phone, is the person that's browsing on Safari. Moreover, and I think my guess is that whatever Apple neuroses about performance that got them to kill Flash is the same thing that's at play here. You go, internet browsing is like 30 times more heavy, I'm making up a number, and slower because you guys have crammed so much shit into every page that it takes megabytes and megabytes and megabytes just to show like a freaking blog. There is an added incentive from a battery lifetime perspective, from a bandwidth perspective, from a compute perspective, and from a security perspective to say, hey, maybe we don't need 30,000 trackers and a bunch of JavaScript bullshit in every website that we go to. So I see the focus on Chrome kind of being like, hey, let's take that shit away from you, Google. Now, where that lands is terrifying, right? Like, are you going to sell? You can't sell it. Presumably, you can't sell it to the Mozilla Foundation because then you're basically creating a different monopoly, right? Like you're going from one to the only other alternative. So then, who are you going to give it to? Cisco? Huh? Like, who are you going to give it to? Some publicly traded company that day was American owned, and a week later is 95% owned by shell companies that trace back to China, right? Like it is a tough thing to suggest, but I think Chrome is a really important thing. I would suggest that Chrome might be more important than the Linux like kernel right now in some ways. I
saw some
very,
Bloomberg
very
reporting.
quick check. how
Are you
how
fact
many of
checking?
you actually use Chrome? Like Juan, do you use Chrome?
I use Chromium derivatives.
All right, but
Everybody
not Chrome
does.
itself, right?
No, of course not.
And
Fuck that.
Ryan, do you use Chrome?
I use Chrome. Tell me why I should stop using Chrome.
I can't tell you that. I would just say that I don't. Well, I stopped using Chrome years ago. I won't
Why? No,
say like
in all
the.
seriousness, is Chrome a massive security risk for the general public, or you view it as a security exposure thing for you as a researcher?
I just felt that Chrome didn't have my best interest in mind. It was
There
not
you
a
go.
browser created with my best interest. So just like everyone else, I'm using Chromium-based browsers, yeah, but not Chrome
That's
itself.
the other monoculture that nobody's talking about. But
Fair enough, yeah, like Vivaldi and Brave and so on, right? Iron
Everything.
browser.
I saw Bloomberg mention that possible Chrome valuation would be in the range of $20 billion. That limits the number of buyers, like Juan was saying, to probably a handful of companies. Where
How do
I
you
don't
even
know.
come up with that fucking valuation?
You're
Like, this
Bloomberg,
is
bro.
such
You have
bullshit.
terminals and stuff.
This is such fucking bullshit. It's almost a way to like, and not to get. This is where I will finally pull out my conspiracy hat. Like, I could finally
Go.
be conspiracy Juan, but it being Bloomberg in particular, it almost feels like the disinterested blockade of like business oligarchs that don't want to see any kind of regulation or antitrust or forcible messing with business of any kind is trying to dissuade the sale by saying, surely Chrome would be worth $20 billion. You're like, bro, it's a free piece of software built on top of a semi-open source thing. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, what is it worth? What are you selling? What are you selling?
So you're skeptical that there's even something to sell. Let's see
I
how it
think
plays out.
I think that, I mean, you're selling, if what you're selling is an install base, right? Like, are you selling the install base? Are you selling the ad delivery mechanism? Like, I think that it's so weird to talk about this because really it would be like if Microsoft sold Edge tomorrow, right? Edge is a nice thin layer on top of Chromium. So if they sell Edge tomorrow, then are they selling the install base? I guess they're selling the install base. They're selling the update mechanism. They're selling whatever developments they've put on top of Chromium. But it's such a weird thing to say. It would be like, someone selling like an Android derivative operating system. So
But it just my question is like, just imagine like Chrome gets sold. So what happens like next day you get Ultra Chrome on your computer?
Ultra Chrome.
Don't start.
Well, it's also hilarious because whoever buys it, like, I bet you they will buy a 300 million or user install base that overnight will become 150 million user
Yeah.
install base, right? Like, it's just so silly.
I would say here the one question that pops to mind is what is more valuable than ads nowadays? Essentially your data. That's the only thing which is becoming more valuable than ads. So anyone buying Chrome can just piggyback on that platform to collect more and more data.
I want to maybe, I'm not gonna say push back, but maybe push forward on that narrative. Like, I think the idea of like your data, your PII being the valuable thing, uh, it
I wouldn't
feels
necessarily just say PII, but I mean, if you look at the current race, AI race, if you want, right? So ChatGPT and the others just training their AIs on what is available on the internet, basically, which
There's your
is
buyer
more
right
and
there.
more. That's
OpenAI.
more and more like shit produced by the previous generation of AI. So you're training your new generation on the shit produced by the previous generation. So if you want to train your AI on live human data, then there's maybe two players that kind of emerge from that battle. And one of them is X, Twitter, however you want to call it, because they have access to live user things that people write and talk about. And the other one would be Chrome, like what people browse, what people write in those pages, how they write their emails. So all that data being available for training AIs will make a difference.
I mean, it's
Great
the
point, because
engagement vehicle.
it also hurts Google significantly in their own training of their own AI posture, or whatever you want to call
Don't
it.
worry about that. Google can't fucking train shit. Like, it
Gmail.
doesn't matter. The Google cannot. Google's failures as far as AI goes point way more to its cultural problems internally than anything else. Google isn't missing data. It isn't missing compute. It isn't missing storage. It's missing leadership and some ability to get out of its own fucking way because it hasn't met a customer in a million years, right? It's a completely insular organization. But like Ryan, before you stop me from this rant, like moving that discussion forward from what Kostin is discussing as far as like the data value, I think this is getting us closer to why this matters. In what you described, Kostin, right? Like you can watch sort of what everybody's doing. What I would suggest is I personally think the narrative around like what these companies want is your data was always a little simplistic in a way that's almost humanistic in its like it's naive because it's humanistic. It says like they want you, right? Like it's like no, I don't think they give a fuck about you. In the like age of surveillance capitalism economy, what they want is the vehicle of engagement. The same way that in the previous mechanism, you really wanted, it was valuable to own the newspaper, it was valuable to own the TV station, it was valuable to own the radio station. They were the vehicles of engagement upon which you would then project ads and material and content, and so much of human value has been derived from being able to um, push content to people. The big difference between the previous generation of engagement models and the current one is the possibility of parsing populations into different levels of targeting that were not possible before. And that's what has created the sickness and malaise of disinformation, misinformation, and everything that we've been dealing with. Before, you and me and Kostin, like let's say that we all lived in the same building, right? We would all tune in, we would turn the TV on, and there was 12 channels, and you would look at one channel and we would all see the same content on that channel. So if we were all watching this one thing, we got one version of reality, and at the end of the day there were maybe 12 versions of reality we could tune into. The thing that broke society is the Facebook introduction and Google introduction and so on of micro targeting, wherein I can create populations upon which I push specific content based on who they are. That's where the value of having your information comes from. But it's not because it's your information, it's because it allows me to create populations that I can then serve ads to and serve content to in a targeted fashion. And that's why, like, Shoshana Zuboff's argument about surveillance capitalism is that capitalism in the 21st century was broken by the advertising companies because you've destroyed the notion of the invisible hand that guides the free market, right? There was no way to control what people wanted to buy, what people cared about. And now you can, because I can divide everybody into specific groups and serve them with a version of the world that is completely incompatible, but that makes them buy dumb shit. And that is where we're at with this. The vehicle of engagement is more valuable than the information engaged.
Which browser should people be using? Microsoft Edge? You get rid of Chrome? We're using Brave? What is the advice to the listeners?
Kostin is our browser expert here. He won't tell us what he uses, but he's got recommendations.
I tell you, so someone asked me like a couple of times what I was using, and I said I use a Chromium-based browser with the Firefox user agent, and Firefox with the Chromium user agent. So whatever you use, don't tell anyone what you use, but like I said, I stopped using Chrome itself years ago. Just the same way I deleted my Facebook account years ago. Um, and I agree with Juan. Like everything Juan was saying is super real, probably. And this is kind of sad to understand that we moved from surveillance communism to surveillance capitalism, and it's worse. Like that's the sad part.
It's efficient.
We're an hour and 5 minutes in, and we got to get Juan back out to CyberWarCon. I want to pivot quickly to a story. Apple shipped iOS 18.1.1 plus some macOS and Vision OS updates to fix two 0 days already exploited in the wild on Intel Mac systems, found by Google Tag, which kind of puts it into another category. But one thing that stood out to me, Costin, was your Magic Money people were sharing this story a lot this week. You think this is cryptocurrency related? What are we guessing here around who these? Because as usual, Apple ships no IOCs. Apple just says it may have been exploited. We have reports that it may have been exploited, so we are left again guessing.
I wanted to say thanks God we have lots of IOCs, unlike the case with the Salt Typhoon, but we don't have any IOCs. I mean,
literally not even a description. Nothing.
Speculate. We can only speculate. What's interesting to me is they say it was exploited on Intel-based macOS. I mean, that's like kind of the old generation, if you want. The new generation with the Apple Silicon, at least not confirmed to be exploited. So one immediate advice to the Magic Money people would be to buy the new generation, buy new Macs, buy new devices. Like everyone will be happy. Apple will be happy. Investors will be happy. Magic Money people will be happy. So that's one.
I don't trust
one piece
this
of
shit.
advice.
Costin doesn't have a new Mac. I think he's just sending us in the wrong direction.
I don't have. I tell you, I have two Intel Macs. That's it. And I definitely want to invest in a Mac Mini because I hear it's pretty.
And they've been modified
good.
to look like Windows machine with like a Linux subsystem.
Shh. Those are secrets. Those are trade secrets.
It would be nice.
Why are we just glossing over Apple? Days exploited in the wild? Like, isn't this
that's
a big
what Apple
story?
wants, bro. Apple wants this. Like, I look, man. I went looking for those CVEs immediately to see, because it's like Clem in them. Like, you know, what have they got? And there's no blog post. There's no discussion of it. But my reading is that the only reason Apple even says they're being actively exploited is not because they know they're being actively exploited.
They just crediting Clem.
Because they found out from Tag, and Project Zero is eventually gonna tell the story, so they can't just pretend that they didn't know. But in most cases, what do we get? This could be, maybe, sort of, maybe someone could have used it, and you're like, you motherfuckers know exactly how it's being used. Like, what are you talking about? So, you know, yeah.
Why are we accepting that kind of nonsense from a company like Apple that we spend all our money with? Like, again,
what do you want me to do? Like, throw a Molotov cocktail through a fucking Apple Store window? Like, what do we do? What do you want me to do?
Go get some Android phones, man.
Fuck that. That's even worse, man. Like,
you see, Costin? Nobody's paying with their pocketbooks. That's why we accept this stuff.
Listen, the only thing, I have only one request here. Can we get like a real blog whenever the blog is out? Can we get a real blog and not the root cause of? Because nobody needs the root cause. I don't need the root cause of this bug. I don't care about that. What we want is who was it, like where was being exploited, by whom, all those things, not the root cause,
you can't
please.
do that. No, because that doesn't fall under how we are hiding our hand in saying we care about security, but not enough to tell you that these people are doing things that you're going to be unhappy with. Because if it's the Chinese, then there's a problem with our manufacturing. If it's the Indians, then there's a problem with their local laws. If it's if it's the US, well, we don't want to piss people off here. So it's this shrinking. Look, the consolidation of the security space has made it so nobody is in a position to speak recklessly and to say what needs to be said to establish a baseline of truth. So instead, we're worried about manufacturing, we're worried about politics, lobbying, etc. So no, we're not going to get that fucking blog unless it was a criminal that like has no home and their parents don't love them and they have no friends and no one's ever going to take care of them, in which case, yeah, fuck those people, right? It's like, all right, cool,
So
man.
I blame certain people for this as well. I mean, whenever Google finds something maybe exploited by Chinese APTs, let's say they write a blog. Whenever they find something which is used for certain purposes, they write a blog without IOCs and without anything that could allow people, and still they get a lot of shit over it. And people complain that they are burning active operations. And so at some point, I think, yeah, it makes sense that Google, they say like, fuck you all. We're just gonna skip
Nothing.
writing any blogs. Like, no more blogs, you sons of bitches. That's it.
Have we seen the North Korean crypto thieves do macOS exploitation before?
We have.
Why would
we
they
have.
need exploitation? They don't need exploits to get on Mac OS boxes. They just poison shit and like trick people.
But we've seen in
Supply
the past.
chains, right?
I'm trying to make an educated guess about who this might be and try to help people, threat model whether they go
If it
get
was
a
the
new.
North Koreans, they would have told us, and there would be a blog already. Like if it's, I bet you it's gonna be like the Chinese, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, it's.
Or Dark Hotel, like
They don't
our
care about Dark
good
Hotel.
old
Like
friends.
they would tell us if it was Dark Hotel. Like that's my point, right? Like you've got these pockets now of like unsavoriness, and if it comes close to the unsavoriness, then we just we it's all passive language. There's no no active tone.
One more thing, like, I would ask is, why would you say that this was being actively exploited on Intel-based Mac? Is it like a marketing strategy? What is it? Why would you
No, I
say
think
that?
No, it's the
I think that
exploit,
they,
right?
but they issued a patch for Mac systems because I got
Correct.
for Apple Silicon because I got the patch on my
Mhm.
Apple Silicon MacBook, so you know that it's affected, but they probably have information that it's only on older
But it's a
older
good
Intel
marketing,
systems.
right? Like, buy
I
the
don't
new
think so.
devices. We even pitched it a few minutes ago.
Eh?
Good marketing.
Good
North
marketing.
Korea,
Well done.
staying in North Korea, Juan, your team pushed out a report on another kind of pushing the needle forward on the DPRK, North Korean fake IT worker network and infiltration into U.S. companies. What's the standout news there? I think there was like some FBI takedown of websites. You guys put out the report. What are the findings?
Can I say one thing before Juan goes deep into this? It's like, I found it impressive, and I wanted to say this is an amazing report. And congrats to the guys who wrote the report. We know them. And I was like so impressed, and it seems so cool to read that they actually found more websites than the FBI. So the FBI found like 3 of them, which they took down. And then the Sentinel-1 team found like a few more, which they're still around, right? And the FBI didn't find them. And they were kind of flexing a bit, like, hey, look what we found. We found a bit more.
Did we get IOCs?
Yeah, props for that. Yeah, tons of IOCs. Absolutely. It's an
Nice.
amazing report. Congrats. Like, well done, guys.
Thanks, guys. I mean, look, this is all credit to Tom Hagel and Dakota Carey, who are actually an amazing pairing for stuff like this, right? So if you look at it, essentially, we've been having these conversations about DPRK IT workers, and there's been some pretty cool stuff that's been put out, including some indictments and discussions of the companies. So when you put Tom and Dakota on it, Hagel did what he does extremely well, and he went looking at the sites and sort of domain registrations and the content of the sites, because like a lot of it is they're copying molds of existing companies or like stuff like that, and then sort of creating these fake entities. But where Hagel starts to turn up a lot of new pieces, and then where I think Dakota kind of supercharges this is with an understanding of, well, the Chinese, both the language and the company registration stuff. There's an element of this that really matters, which is those fake companies have to help those IT workers launder that money. So they are actually companies. Like they need to be registered somewhere and like need to have some vehicles for how some of that stuff is being washed out. So between the two of them, they were able to uncover a whole bunch of stuff. And yeah, I mean, very cool work. All credit to these guys.
How are they finding these jobs when Americans are finding it tough to find IT jobs? Are they accepting like are they accepting like a quarter of the pay? Like, help me understand why this ecosystem is so active. I can't imagine, like we discussed this on the podcast before. You can't imagine you'd hire one of these people. There's an
Well,
entire ecosystem of looking for cheap talent, right?
it's gig economy plus plus, right? Like you're talking about uh, being able to hire, let's say, like you're a middling tech company that needs a Rust developer or a Node.js developer or whatever, doesn't have the money to compete with everybody else on engineering and can just hire like a remote worker who has all the skills that we were asking for at a very normal, like reasonable price. You go, why not? Right? Like and that's part of the enshittification of sort of this whole space of, the wanting this sort of Fiverr model to like, well, I don't want to give a shit about who this person is. I don't really want to give them health insurance. Like, how can I just get my hands on somebody who's gonna churn out what we needed and for all I care, I don't even want to know what their face looks like. And that's
Which
literally
tells
what's
me this
happening
problem,
here.
which tells me this problem isn't going away anytime soon. This is something
No.
that'll be here for a very, very long time, and it's just one of those things we'll deal with.
No. Yep. Yep.
Costin, your turn to share some updates on the magic money corner of the world. Cryptocurrency world and cybersecurity is starting to intersect more and more. I keep telling people crypto bug bounties is the best bug bounties because the actual crypto is the money is the prize. And I know we make fun of it calling it magic money, but it's more important for us to really understand where that ecosystem going because I feel like they're taking the lead on what offense looks like. There's a new story out today with a developer using ChatGPT to write code, and the code end up stealing his stuff. Costin, can you explain this one?
Yeah, and let's think for a bit about the context around this as we are filming this. Bitcoin is close to $100,000. $100,000 for one Bitcoin. Everything is just going crazy, sky high. So no surprise that threat actors are just refocusing more and more in this direction. To me, what this story kind of means, what we are seeing here is perhaps, I would say, a trend in the sense that probably future attacks, as more and more people use ChatGPT to write code, will look exactly like this. So what happened here is what a lot of people are doing at the moment is just write code with ChatGPT. So you go into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you, some people say please, but most people say, can you write me I always say please because you never know, like in 1 to 5 years, you never know, judgment day. And then maybe they'll remember who said please. I said please. So I always say,
What are they
can you
pleasing for?
please write me a piece of code in Python or Rust or whatever that does this. So in this case, the developer asked for a piece of code that was working with cryptocurrencies, and ChatGPT wrote the code leveraging a malicious API. That's what it is. Like, this website is a malicious API. It's available on the internet. They had a GitHub repository. And what the code does, it actually requires your private key in order to work. So you need to put your private key, you send it to the API, and that's game over. Like, they have your private key. I looked a bit at the website, and they even have an API to generate a private public key pair. Like, who does that? Like, who uses an API to generate your private key? Because, yeah, they will have your private key. So you need to be careful. You need to be careful how you use these AI tools to write code. I mean, if you see that the code doesn't look right, then just maybe don't use it. But I think this is the catch, that many of the people who use the AI tools, they are not programmers, they are not skilled programmers. So it's difficult to recognize when the code is malicious. And two, the bigger the code, the smaller the chance to actually spot a tiny, backdoor inserted in there. The fact that the AI just leverages what is available, this creates a very interesting attack vector. poisoning repositories and trying to fool AI into believing that this is how you write the code for whatever. So I find like it's a fascinating story, which we are gonna see in the future more and more, and we're gonna see supply chain attacks in other fields, not just cryptocurrencies, where the AI actually writes malicious code for you.
You see it kind of like a G10 thing that is long term, slow, laborious, just using the AI to insert into the supply chain?
I can imagine, yeah, that sophisticated threat actors right now they're trying to poison AIs into leveraging their malicious APIs and malicious code fragments in the future, hoping that when people use it, their code is, preferred for some reason. So I do see this as like an interesting, next dimension style attacks in the future.
I
Juan,
mean,
can you
there's
say please and ask them not to do this?
please don't. Yeah, I Gabe Shapiro makes fun of me for being polite to the LLM as well.
You say
I
please,
actually,
right? You say
yeah,
please.
I actually just rewarded and like you. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Like when it does a
Thank
good
you.
job, it's like well done. Well, so we joke about that, but there was a paper I really wanted us to read and engage on in this podcast. It was called GSM Symbolic. It's about like evaluation of like LLM reasoning, and maybe we can discuss it for the next episode. But one of the things to note on the please side of things is uh, you'll never know what actually improves performance for some of these LLMs. I mean, at the end of the day, like we want to think of them as reasoning engines, and in reality, they're just fucking statistical engines. And sometimes, a change of one word makes a big difference in the outcomes that you will get. It's not necessarily the ones you want. Maybe please is something that's associated with begging and having like a lower performance as opposed to like just fucking do it is a different, like maybe that'll get you better performance. Um, in any case, like addressing what um, Ryan was talking about and sort of bringing up with this story, um, there's so many attack scenarios that are now becoming clear because we have reached the action stage of AI tooling being the more popular aspect of things. So, for example, I think um, I am looking very harshly on Anthropic coming out with this tool use model that you give control of your computer and like it can just click around and do whatever you want. Like, sure, right? Like right there, I think that is a massive security problem, and it's like the evolution of the what were those things that were supposed to introduce like mouse jitter so that it looked like you were working all day during the pandemic. Like this is the next version of that, and presumably that's going to take up some gig economy stuff, but it's the typical like AI overlords not giving a flying fuck of like what they introduce into the world. On the potential attack side, we are getting there, right? Like I was on Blue Sky talking about things like Cursor AI, and these different types of uh, LLM integrated development environments, right? IDEs that include LLM stuff. And frankly, I fucking love it. I think it's great. Like I use it to like save me so much time because you can talk with your code base and it's like developing stuff for you. But like the more that we build this shit, the more you are essentially automating and abstracting away your familiarity with your code base, like what's actually in it. And it's inevitable that that brings up Gia-Tan style attacks much more easily, right? Like, what can I introduce into your code base later on? What can I introduce into your code base in portions of it that you just imported and pulled, right? Can I just like shove something into some underlying JavaScript library that you think you just pulled off of GitHub or whatever, and like that's it. Like this adds a layer of like fighting back that like this thing is thinking in how it subverts you, and that's giving it too much credit, but rather it gives so many opportunities to have the local part of the CI/CD pipeline sort of be fucked with in ways that I think we're just have no chance of handling, like no chance.
this is not a crypto magic money story at all. This is more of a story around like supply chain and the implications of using this. Costin, none of this is going to stop any of you from using ChatGPT to create code, though, right? I mean, this is
Not at all. No, I mean, if you know how to use it, it's an amazing weapon. Like it's super, super powerful. I'm honest here. I've been writing code for like 30 years now, and my code doesn't look as pretty as the one that ChatGPT writes for me. So yeah, but on the other hand, this prompt engineering, in a way, it's also programming. You're programming ChatGPT to write the code for you. So I guess in the future, nobody will study or learn Python or whatever language in depth. Instead, it's way more valuable and powerful to learn how to do prompt engineering and get the AI to write the code for you.
and if you go deeper, you get an AI to do the prompt engineering for you, and it never
You have to.
ends.
Gotta be recursive,
Sure. And
Closing
at some
thoughts?
point, it becomes aware, and then it goes after the people who said just write the code
fucking
without
write the code.
please. Exactly. Yeah. So
That's-
you're all doomed.
Let's get Juanito out of here and back to CyberWarCon. Closing thoughts from you, Costin. When is your next vacation?
Soon, because pretty soon. Well, there's two things. Next week, there's a big conference in Romania called DevCamp, which is the largest security conference in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe being a pretty interesting place in the world. In case people
Getting
are not
warmer
aware.
and warmer.
Getting
hear good
warmer,
things.
yes. So yeah, that's one thing, and afterwards is the National Day of Romania. So vacation.
Vacation.
Juanito, what's next for you?
I will make it to CyberWarCon, perhaps like the last few hours. And to be honest, I'll be happy to just kind of stick around here and get some actual work done. So trying to do a bit more research, and I really want to codify some of the stuff around like the LabsCon keynote and some of the more positive approach to TI that I've been sort of thinking about and brainstorming on for a while. Like I think we're turning that into something that is like the keynote drops off still in the like kind of negative, like this is why things aren't working side of it, and I never really got to do the like, okay, this is where we need to go to part of it. So I'm starting to think about how I might put that forward in some capacity that actually helps others.
And from my side, shout out to Pascual Stirparo, who's running around CyberWarCon with a 3-body problem shirt. He's representing, but more importantly, Pascual's conference, PivotCon, is this invite-only conference. Registration is now open. It's directly for the folks for our tiny little audience. I encourage folks to go check it out. It's at pivotcon.com. Is it?
I think
Is that
so.
the website?
.org.
It's a great conference.
TLP Red conference, though, right? It's like one of those inside baseball type conference. Costin, do you plan to go out there for this conference this year?
Absolutely. And actually, Juan was there as well with me.
We hung out last time.
We hung out last. It was an amazing conference, and I can confirm it's pivotcon.org, right?
Yeah.
Pivotcon.org. Registration is open.
Registration is open again. It's an invite only, so it means you can apply for an invitation, and if you haven't done anything bad and you are polite to LLMs, you will hopefully get an invite.
Thank you very much, guys. Have yourselves a great week.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.